She walked into the lobby wearing a plain linen blouse, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder, and flats that had clearly seen more sidewalks than boardrooms. The marble floors gleamed beneath her quiet steps, and the air was thick with designer cologne and sharper judgments. Executives whispered, interns chuckled, and one smug candidate even tossed a dollar bill at her feet. They thought she was lost. They thought she didn't belong. But what no one in that skyscraper knew, not the hiring panel, not the fast-tracked Ivy Leaguers, not even the CEO, was that the woman they were mocking owned the building they were standing in. And by the end of the day, their careers, reputations, and illusions of power would collapse, quietly, completely, and publicly. Because Rachel Monroe didn't come to get a job. She came to change everything. Rachel Monroe stepped through the revolving doors of Westbridge Capital, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country. The lobby, with its 30-foot ceilings, marble floors, and crystal chandelier the size of a small pickup truck, gleamed like a cathedral of wealth. Men in $1,000 suits rushed by, clutching tablets and talking into Bluetooth headsets. Every detail screamed prestige, except Rachel. She wore a white linen blouse, beige slacks, and a pair of worn, comfortable flats. Her hair was neatly tied back, her face free of makeup. In one hand, she carried a simple canvas tote bag. To most people in that lobby, she looked like a secretary, maybe even the janitor. At 48, she didn't dress to impress, but that was the point. A young receptionist glanced at her and forced a tight smile. Interview candidates usually use the side entrance, she said, pointing without lifting her eyes from her screen. Rachel nodded politely, thanked her, and walked quietly toward the secondary elevator hall. She didn't react to the whispers that followed. Did she get lost? What's with the grocery bag? Wrong floor. Grandma. The laughter was soft but sharp. What no one knew, what they never imagined, was that Rachel Monroe wasn't there to ask for a job. She was the chairwoman of the board. The firm she was walking through? She helped build it from the ground up. 12 years earlier, she had designed its recruitment system to focus on merit and ethics. Not appearance or connections, but lately, she'd heard rumors of corruption, favoritism, and discrimination. And so, today, Rachel returned in disguise, no title, no driver, no jewelry, to see for herself how far her company had strayed from its values. This wasn't just a test for them. It was a reckoning. The elevator opened to the 42nd floor, Westbridge's executive wing, where views of the Manhattan skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows. Rachel stepped out quietly, unnoticed by the others in line. The hallway was lined with plush leather chairs and glossy wooden tables. Soft jazz played overhead. A silver tray of bottled water and imported coffee sat untouched. Too common to impress the crowd gathered here. Every candidate waiting for their turn wore designer suits, $600 shoes, and watches that cost more than Rachel's car. Their hair was perfectly styled, resumes printed on thick linen paper, and smiles as sharp as razors. When Rachel took a seat near the end of the row, the laughter began. "That your briefcase?" One man smirked, nodding at her canvas tote. Another chimed in, "Looks like she stopped at the farmer's market on the way up." The ringleader was Chase Brighton, early 30s, tall, handsome, and arrogant. His pinstriped suit hugged his frame like it had been stitched on. His Rolex glinted as he pulled out a crisp dollar bill and flicked it toward Rachel's feet. "For your dry cleaning," he said with a grin. Snickers rippled through the hallway. A woman in red heels and a high-end blazer leaned toward the guy next to her and whispered, "She's someone's mom who got lost." Rachel didn't blink. She simply reached into her tote, pulled out a worn leather notebook and a pen, and began jotting something down. Her calm only made them bolder. When her name was called, the laughter paused, briefly. The receptionist glanced at her uncertainly before opening the door to the interview suite. Rachel walked in, still steady, still quiet. Inside sat 3 senior executives. Mark Daniels, head of human resources, with a booming voice and a smug grin. Sabrina Clark, director of operations, her lipstick perfect and her eyes cold. Jeff Kim, the firm's strategy chief, arms folded, unimpressed. They barely looked at her. Mark leaned back in his leather chair. "Are you the actual candidate?" he asked, voice thick with sarcasm. Thought you were with catering. Sabrina chuckled. Is that linen? For a job interview? Jeff didn't speak. He just raised an eyebrow and clicked his pen slowly. Rachel placed her resume on the table. If you'll review my experience, we can begin. Mark took one look at the folder, scoffed, and tossed it aside, unopened. We'll circle back, he said, but first, tell me, what made you think you could lead here looking like that? Rachel met his eyes, her tone steady. Because I've led teams across 3 continents and closed $80 billion in investment deals in the last 10 years. Sabrina rolled her eyes. So you say, but here at Westbridge, presentation matters. Leadership has a standard. Then came the slide. Jeff flicked on the projector. A massive image lit the wall. A blurry photo of a woman in a linen blouse, clearly Rachel, marked with a giant red X. Above it, dressed to fail. The room laughed. Rachel didn't. Let's test your skill, Sabrina said, dropping a packet in front of her. Here's a financial model with a few intentional contradictions. 5 minutes to solve it. It was 10 pages long. Rachel flipped through it calmly, recognizing the trap for what it was. Mark smirked. We're looking for people who can think under pressure. Rachel began writing, clear, focused, silent. Halfway through, Jeff interrupted. Where'd you go to school again? Wharton, class of '98. Rachel replied. Sabrina blinked. You expect us to believe that? Rachel looked up. I don't need you to believe anything. Just read my work. Time was called. Sabrina snatched the papers. Didn't even glance at them. You're not a fit, she said flatly. Wrong look. Weak presence. Mediocre answers. Mark added. Frankly, I've seen interns with more poise. Chase Brighton suddenly appeared at the door, winked at Mark, and walked in uninvited. There's our guy, Jeff said loudly. Sabrina smiled and slid his folder, already marked approved, to the top of the pile. Rachel stood, tote in hand, expression calm. I don't know of any candidate so outstanding that their wardrobe overrides merit. But if envelopes and old favors now outweigh skill, this company has lost its way. Mark stood sharply. Are you accusing us of misconduct? Rachel didn't flinch. No, I'm confirming it. And with that, she walked toward the door, unshaken. Outside, whispers and phones waited. But inside, a storm had just begun to brew. The hallway outside the interview room buzzed with low laughter and whispering. Candidates crowded around their phones, scrolling through videos and photos. One clip of Rachel being handed the rigged test was already making the rounds in a private Slack channel called Westbridge Legends. The caption read, When the janitor thinks she's the CEO. Inside the glass-walled suite, Rachel had just reached the elevator. She pressed the button, her tote in hand, face calm. But behind her, a voice called out, firm, authoritative. Wait. She turned. From the corner office down the hall, Calvin Rhodes, CEO of Westbridge Capital, was walking toward her. At 55, he was sharp in every sense, steel gray hair, tailored navy suit, and eyes like polished glass. His pace was measured, but every step shifted the atmosphere like thunder approaching. The laughter stopped. Every head turned. When Calvin reached Rachel, he paused, then bowed slightly. Madam Chairwoman, he said, my sincerest apologies for the delay. Gasps rippled through the hallway. The smug expressions melted. A few phones slipped from stunned hands. Sabrina Clark, still holding Rachel's untouched test, went pale. Inside the interview room, Mark Daniels shot upright. Chairwoman, he whispered, glancing at Jeff Kim, whose lips were suddenly pressed into a tight, white line. Rachel nodded once and stepped forward. She unbuttoned the linen blazer she'd worn all morning and revealed a small, gold-plated badge clipped to the inside of her blouse. It gleamed under the recessed lights. Rachel Monroe, Chairwoman, Westbridge Capital. She turned to face the panel. Mark, Sabrina, and Jeff, all still frozen in their seats. I wasn't here to apply for a position, Rachel said, voice calm but cutting. I came to evaluate the very hiring system I helped design, one meant to protect integrity and reward true merit. Her words dropped like stones into a well. Today, she continued, you mocked a candidate based on clothing, dismissed a resume without reading it, and pre-selected a donor's son for a senior leadership role. Mark's mouth opened, but no sound came. Rachel pulled her tablet from her tote, tapping it once. The conference screen on the wall flickered to life. A chat log appeared, taken from the Westbridge Legends Slack group. Screenshots showed Jeff posting the "dressed to fail" slide with the caption, "Let's watch her fold." Sabrina had replied, "Let's send her to reception where she belongs." Rachel clicked again. Another window opened. Bank transfers. $150 from Brighton Holdings into a Shell account tied to Mark Daniels. Chase Brighton, now visibly sweating in the hallway, took a step back. A junior analyst blocked his path. "I trusted Westbridge would uphold its founding values," Rachel said, eyes now hard. "What I saw today was rot. And rot spreads if left unchecked." Calvin stepped forward, his face a mask of fury. "Effective immediately," he said, voice echoing. "Mark Daniels, Sabrina Clark, and Jeff Kim are suspended pending investigation. Mr. Brighton's application is revoked. Security will escort you out." Gasps gave way to silence. Rachel looked directly at the candidates in the hallway, the ones who had mocked her. "I don't care about your shoes, your handbags, or your last names," she said. "I care about whether you're honest, capable, and willing to do the work." She picked up her test, the one they had torn in half, and placed it gently on the table. "Integrity isn't about how you look when people are watching," she said. "It's about who you are when no one thinks you matter." Security arrived. Chase was quietly removed. Sabrina dropped her pen. Jeff's cufflinks rattled as he collected his things. Mark tried to protest, but Calvin silenced him with a glance. Rachel turned to leave. Behind her, the Westbridge logo shimmered in gold on the glass wall. But in that moment, it didn't represent power or wealth. It represented a firm finally facing its reckoning. And the woman they had dismissed had just become the standard by which they'd all be judged. By noon that same day, every major financial outlet in the country was running with the headline, "Chairwoman goes undercover, Westbridge executives exposed for corruption and elitism." Rachel Monroe had barely returned to her office when the fallout began to unfold. Emails flooded in from board members, journalists, legal advisors, and even a few quietly panicked rivals on Wall Street. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal ran a detailed exposé of the rigged interview, the private Slack channel, and the bribery scheme that had favored Chase Brighton and others like him. Social media erupted. The video of CEO Calvin Rhodes addressing Rachel as "Madam Chairwoman" had already hit 8 million views. LinkedIn comments piled on. "She showed more leadership in 10 minutes than the entire board did all year." "Integrity wears linen." Monroe standard, "Make hiring fair again." But Rachel didn't waste time basking in applause. She was already in the executive boardroom at 2 p.m. sharp, facing 14 stunned directors seated around the long mahogany table. "This isn't a PR crisis," Rachel began, standing at the head of the table with her signature canvas tote beside her. "This is a cultural collapse." Behind her, a monitor displayed a growing list of Westbridge managers linked to unethical hiring practices, names tied to favoritism, discrimination, and off-the-record payments for guaranteed roles. Some were department heads, others had been at Westbridge for over a decade. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "You didn't just fail to uphold the system," she said, her tone razor sharp. "You enabled its decay." The room was silent. Then Rachel pulled a navy folder from her tote and slid it across the table to Calvin. "This is the proposal," she said. "We clean house." Inside were immediate directives. A full internal audit of all hiring decisions from the last 5 years. Terminations for any executive found complicit in biased or unethical hiring. Suspension of bonus structures tied to internal referrals. Mandatory ethics retraining for all leadership roles. And most notably, the introduction of blind recruitment. Rachel called it the Monroe Standard. "From now on," she said, "no names, no headshots, no alma maters on resumes. Candidates will be evaluated on skills, results, and integrity, nothing else." One board member, a man in a silver tie who had known Rachel for 15 years, cleared his throat. "This is going to rattle the industry." Rachel looked at him. "Good." She called for a vote. The result was unanimous. By 4 p.m., HR had issued immediate suspensions to 11 employees. Laptops were collected, badges deactivated, Sabrina Clark's nameplate was already gone from her door. Mark Daniels' access card had been flagged for deactivation before he even reached the elevator. By 5:30, the company's Instagram, once filled with staged photos of executives in tailored suits, had been flooded with comments. "Where's the apology? Do better. Westbridge. Linen greater than luxury." Westbridge issued an official statement that evening, confirming all executive suspensions and the immediate rollout of the Monroe Standard. But it wasn't just the company that trembled. By the following morning, 4 other major firms, including Crestfield Holdings and Mayfair & Company, announced internal reviews of their own hiring practices. Industry veterans called it a watershed moment. CNN aired a primetime segment titled, "The Woman Who Tore Down Wall Street's Gatekeeping." In it, a retired executive remarked, "When someone like Rachel Monroe takes action, the whole street pays attention. She didn't raise her voice, she raised the bar." Even Chase Brighton's father, chairman of Brighton Holdings, issued a public apology and resigned from his board seat, citing a failure to instill proper values. At Westbridge, Rachel worked late that night, reviewing candidate reports and planning department-wide ethics seminars. She turned down every press interview. She wasn't interested in being a media figure. Her work wasn't finished. She paused only once, in the quiet of her office. She looked out over the New York skyline, the lights blinking across a city that never stopped moving. The same firm that had once sneered at her linen shirt now stood trembling under her calm authority. And she wasn't done yet. A week after the Westbridge scandal broke, Rachel Monroe stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., in a modest navy blazer, her canvas towed by her side. The room was packed, CEOs, lawmakers, economists, and media crews. Behind her, a banner read, "The Monroe Standard. Merit over appearance. Integrity over privilege." She adjusted the microphone, then looked across the crowd, not with the air of someone demanding attention, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned it. "We've mistaken polish for potential," she began. "We've built systems where perception outweighs principle. That ends today." Flashbulbs clicked, hands scribbled notes. Rachel laid out the new hiring model in full. All applications moving forward would be stripped of names, photos, graduation years, and any data that could trigger bias. Resumes would be evaluated purely on skills, achievements, and work ethic. Internal audits would be conducted every 6 months. Interviewers would undergo bias training and ethics certification. "We're not just changing how we hire," she said, "we're changing who gets seen." Within 48 hours, over 50 major corporations, from Goldman Sachs to Amazon, announced they were adopting versions of the Monroe Standard. The Department of Labor praised the framework as a new frontier in fair employment. The New York Times called her speech a turning point in corporate accountability. But Rachel never lingered in the spotlight. Instead, she returned to Brooklyn Heights, to the brownstone she shared with her husband Nathan, a former cybersecurity architect turned children's tech literacy advocate. In the evenings, they sat on the back porch with mugs of tea, watching their 10-year-old daughter play fetch with their golden retriever. Scout. Their lives were quiet, intentional. Inside the brownstone, the only trophy on display wasn't an award or a degree, it was a photo. Rachel, standing at that DC podium, tote in hand, linen shirt crisp, a quiet smile on her face. Next to the frame was a note scribbled by her daughter. "My mom is a boss, and she wears flats." At Westbridge, the impact was seismic. The Royce Suite, once reserved for the most elite applicants, was turned into the Monroe Conference Center, a space used to host open-access workshops for underrepresented professionals. New hires came from community colleges, coding boot camps, military service, and second-chance programs. Rachel personally reviewed the first wave of anonymized applications and hand-selected 10 team leads who had once been overlooked simply because they didn't look the part. The culture changed, slowly, but truly. Former panelists, Mark Daniels, Sabrina Clark, Jeff Kim, faded into obscurity. Their resumes tarnished, their arrogance now a liability. Chase Brighton's TikTok taunts turned to cautionary memes, captioned, "She wore linen, now you wear regret." Meanwhile, Rachel's quiet influence spread beyond finance. At a World Economic Forum panel in Davos, Rachel stood beside leaders from across the globe, when asked why she'd gone undercover instead of simply issuing a memo. Her reply was simple: sometimes, to fix a broken system, you have to walk through it wearing the same shoes as the people it steps on. That quote would headline magazines, be printed on posters in universities, and even be engraved on a sculpture placed in Westbridge's main lobby, a bronze tote, open and filled with books. Rachel continued to mentor women, veterans, and mid-career changers through her foundation, Path Forward, which offered free resources and training for those traditionally shut out of elite spaces. Over 10,000 professionals went through the program in its first year alone. But to Rachel, the numbers didn't matter as much as the stories. Like the single mother from Ohio who now led a compliance team. Or the Army vet who'd been laughed out of 4 interviews but now managed a $300 million portfolio. Or the young man from Mississippi who once cleaned office floors at Westbridge and now sat on its strategy board. Rachel never forgot why she started. Not for headlines, not for revenge, but because a company's true value isn't measured by its stock price, its square footage, or the watches on its executives' wrists. It's measured by its character. And thanks to her, character finally had a seat at the table. In the end, Rachel Monroe didn't just expose a broken hiring process, she reminded the world what real leadership looks like. She didn't need a tailored suit or a high-gloss resume to command a room. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held her ground with dignity, truth, and purpose. From the boardroom to national headlines, her quiet courage became a catalyst for change, proving that character still counts in a world obsessed with appearances. The Monroe Standard swept across industries, leveling the playing field for thousands who were once invisible. But Rachel didn't stop there. She returned home to her Brooklyn brownstone, her family, and her purpose: to keep building systems that lift others up. Her story is a reminder to all of us, especially those who've lived long enough to know better, that respect, fairness, and humility are not old-fashioned values. They are timeless foundations. So the next time you meet someone who doesn't look the part, pause before you judge, because beneath that linen shirt may be a mind that moves markets, a heart that changes lives, or a voice that rewrites the rules. Rachel Monroe didn't walk into Westbridge to make a scene. She walked in to set a standard. And in doing so, she left us all with one lasting lesson. Never underestimate quiet strength. It's the kind that rebuilds the world.